Yo, yo, yo. That's kind of weird, but what's up, everyone? I hope you're doing well. We took a slight break from class because last week was crazy, obviously, really stressful. But things are looking pretty good right now. But I don't really want to talk or think about that. For me, always math is like a nice something that's in your control. Okay, so I skipped week 3 problem set 2, basically for the election, but we are starting again with week 4, and we're going to do 2 lessons this week that are going to wrap up this unit. Okay, so what I want you to think mentally for this class is that we have a test to complete before Thanksgiving, which is in about 2 weeks, and that test will cover quadratics. So anything that has an x squared as the leading number, and we've done this for a long time, like too long because just like the quarter and all that crap. So the graphing is going to be the biggest component of that test, and we'll make sure to review a lot next week. But this week we're going to focus again on what we should do if we have a leading number. Okay, so this week is all about leading coefficients, how to factor them first, and then next problem set we'll talk about what we do if we have a leading coefficient but we can't factor. So yeah, we're going to start with that, and then we're going to do some interesting quadratics that look a little different, but I think it's going to be a decently easy, honestly. And the big goal is kind of to figure out the shortcut, okay? So I made you do the first one as a FOIL reference just so we can always see what's happening. And we're going to try to factor this one the long way, which I really like. And because it's been, I guess, a week or so since I did this, let's review it again. And sorry if that intro is kind of jumbled. If we have a leading coefficient and we want to factor, we're going to multiply the leading number to the outside number, and that's going to tell me what I'm factoring. So we want to find 2 numbers that multiply to 45 that add up to 18. Okay? Again, if there wasn't a number here, you just take this outside number. But if we have a leading number, we multiply them together. So I always do the factoring part when I teach it really quickly, but on your own, make sure you're taking your time because some numbers like 45 can be difficult. So we have 15 and 3 as those 2 numbers, and the long method that we have to use, at least before, is that if we know those 2 factors, we're going to use those 2 factors to replace the middle number, and then we're going to have to do the greatest common factor thing. So again, your first goal is split up the middle number into the 2 factors that work. And what I think is like the coolest way to think about this is that you're going literally backwards from FOIL. Okay, and that's why we talked about FOIL this week, or last week as well. So we had our 3 sets. We now have 4 numbers, and once you have the 4 numbers, you're going to split it in half and then figure out what you're doing in each half individually. So we look at 5x squared plus 15x, and all we're trying to do is figure out the greatest common factor of the numbers and then the x's. So we can divide 5 and 15 by 5. So 5 goes on the outside. And then we have x squared and we have x. And remember that the first 2 terms are always going to share x, okay? Because x squared divided by x leaves you with x. And you can still do x divided by x and they would cancel out. So that's the outside number. Again, you look for the number that they have in common and then the number of x's. But then once you do that, you have to figure out what's on the inside of the parenthesis, which is all that's left over. So think that 5x times x gives you 5x squared. And then what number here times 5x would give me 15x, which is 3. So there's 2 ways to think about it. You could do 15 divided by 5 to get that number, or just think what times 5x gives me 15x. But that was the big skill from week 3. We do the exact same thing on the second side. 3 and 9 share the number 3. And then we divide both of these terms by 3. So 3x divided by 3, all that's left is x, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. From there, you just take the 2 greatest common factors and that becomes one of your factors. and then this has to be the same, and that becomes the second factor. So again, that was our review. I don't even think I explained it that well, but what we want to do from now on, if we can, is see if we can have a shortcut where we can just figure out from the equation what the two factors are. And the first thing to know is that the long way, I like the long way a lot, and it always is going to work. So use the long way if you ever get stuck. But I think, one of the biggest points of a math class is to, think as deeply and as critically as you can. And a lot of people can just take the set with leading coefficient and immediately know what the factors are. So we're going to talk about how you could do that. What I want you to notice is that the complication here is that we have the leading number. If we were factoring something without a leading number, like this, we can do it in our head because we just know two numbers that multiply to this and add to this would be -12 and 3, which become the two factors. But here, it's not going to be x and x, right? There's going to be a leading number because we know that the first two terms have to multiply to 5x squared. Okay, so if we were trying to get this result from the beginning, the first step, and honestly I'm going to do it on a separate sheet of paper. What we know is that this is going to factor to two terms, right? And since 5 you can't divide by, or is a prime number, that means that my leading numbers are going to have to be 5x and x. Hopefully everyone is with me so far. Let's say it was something like 6x squared. Like that. There are actually multiple ways that we could split this up with factors, right? So you could have 6x and x, 3x and 2x. Both of these are possible because 3x times 2x gives me 6x squared, and 6x times x gives me 6x squared. So you have to be aware when you're first trying to do the shortcut of what your leading numbers are or could be. Okay? Once you know that it's going to be 5x and x, all we have to think is what two numbers are we going to put here to make FOIL work, okay? And we know that the way FOIL works is the first two numbers multiply together for this number, the second two numbers multiply together for this number, and then the middle is kind of a combination of multiplying the ends to, like, the x's to the numbers. So here, this is actually easier than you think. All we have to do is find two numbers that multiply to 9 to put here and here, okay? So it has to be factors of 9. So it has to be 1 and 9, or 3 and 3. So if this is a small number, that's actually going to help you. There's only two things that could possibly happen. And from here, it's all about logic, right? So you could actually just fill them both in and see which of them foils correctly. And that's what we'll do for this method. And the more you do it, the better you'll just kind of be able to make these kind of educated guesses in your head. So this or this has to be correct because this times this has to equal this. The last step, if we want to figure out the shortcut to figure out which of these is correct, is multiply the inside and the outside together and see what they add up to. So 5x times 9 gives you 45x, plus 1 times x would be 46x. And that's not what the middle is. We know that when you multiply the insides together and the outsides together, it has to add up to 18. So this is definitely not going to work. Here, 5x times 3 would be 15x, and then 3 times x would be 3x. And that is the middle we wanted. So just by thinking logically, just by knowing what could happen, we were able to do it without this, right? We had the same conclusion. And again, this always works, and this is even the first year I'm teaching the shortcut. So if that's confusing, don't worry about it. But let's do this one with the shortcut as well, now that we don't know what the answer is going to be. The first thing to do is figure out what your leading numbers could be. So if we see 3x squared minus 10x minus 8, the leading numbers are going to be 3x and x. There's no other way to split up this this first number. Crap. And again, that's why I give you the FOIL reference, and that's why you have to be pretty good at foiling. Just so you understand that the only way we can factor this, our leading numbers have to be 3x and x, because 3x times x gives me 3x squared. There's no other way to get the number 3 than 3 in itself, right? Because it's a prime number. From here, the second step is figure out what we should do with the second number, or the outside, or the last number, which is -8. And that -8, we'll kind of ignore the negative right now at least, because that definitely is going to screw us up a bit. But we know that the general factors for a number like 8 are 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. Nothing else will work. So there's actually 8 possibilities then in this case. Because the -1, like the 1 or the 8 could be negative, and the 2 or the 4 could be negative. So here you have to figure out which of these makes this whole equation work. And instead of having to write it out every time, let's just think about it logically, because that's how I would do it in my head. If it was -1 and 8, 8 times 3x gives me 24x. So that's going to be way, way, way bigger than -10. Remember, we're trying to get two numbers here that are going to make -10 work. So let me just write that. Either way, positive or negative, you're going to have to multiply. So this number definitely can't be 8, because -8 or 8, both of them times 3 would give me 24. But we could try the other way, which would be 8 on this side and -1 here. If this is our first good guess, let's think that 3x times -1 will give me -3x, and 8 times x would give me 8x. So that's not going to work. And if we flipped the signs, 3 and 8 are never going to work with the number 10, right? Because we could make this +3 and -8, so that isn't going to work, right? These aren't going to be the factors. So it's going to be 2 and 4, and all we have to do is figure out what's going to work in my equation. And I think if you were doing this on your own, it would be a lot quicker, but you might honestly find the short method easier. And honestly, I'm realizing, the long method is maybe just better. I don't know. Here, let's just see what happens if we plug in, because it's -10, my instinct here is it's going to be -4 here, -12x plus 2x, right? That's definitely going to be the answer. And just so we're clear on why, it's 3x times -4, so -12x, and then 2 times x would be plus 2x, so that's going to be -10x. So yeah, as this video goes on, I realize the short method, while I think it's worth it because it's fun to think about it logically, isn't necessarily better. This example is just way harder in all ways because we have 6x in the front. So if we have 6x in the front, think that we don't even know the leading numbers. It could be this, or it could be this. So maybe if that intimidated you, you could just do it the long way. But the way that I'm going to think through this now is let's figure out it has to add up to 20, and 16 doesn't have that many factors. It's a little deceptive because it's like a famous number, but 16 only has 3 different factors, and everything's positive here. So my instinct is it's going to be this, like the smaller numbers. If we put 4 here, plus 4 and plus 4 would be 8 and 12. So actually that's going to be the answer. So again, you might get lucky, which is what just happened here, and I'm kind of just doing that for the sake of the video too. But I found factors that work. But if you're ever going to just try to find the factors, you have to check your work by foiling. So 3x times 4 gives me 12x, and then 4 times 2 gives me 8x. Okay, so that's that. Finally in a bit more of a rhythm. I was off my rhythm before, but only do the shortcut method if you're just finding everything in this class really easy. We do have a second part of the lesson, and that's what's called special quadratics. And I really like teaching this. I think it's a really cool concept, so hopefully you appreciate it. But this is the very last quadratic form that we could see, okay? And the key here is it's actually just standard form but hidden. And it's in a squared minus b squared. So this is the first one we're going to do, and everything will flow from this one example. And if you're looking at this, the first thing you always want to do in this class, or anytime you're tackled with a math problem, or maybe just a problem in general, is try to connect it to something you know, or what looks different about this than the other questions we've done. And if we notice, there's no middle term. There's no x. Okay, so if you wanted to factor this, right, it would be difficult because you try to find 2 numbers that multiply to -9, but then you wouldn't have a second number that is a lead for you. But the good news in math is that even if there isn't a number there, there could be a number with 0 there, right? So this, if we don't see any x's, that actually means that there's 0 x's there. And you don't have to do this every time, but it makes the explanation really work. If you see this, this is what's happening, and that's how you could convert something to standard form. And the logic is just like all the other questions. 2 numbers that multiply to -9, but add up to 0. And maybe you get it, maybe you don't, but for 2 numbers to add up to 0, that doesn't just happen if you have 2 numbers like 2 and 4, right? They're going to add up to 6. But you can have 2 numbers add up to each other to equal 0 if they're the same number, positive and negative. So we've already done 9 in this exact question, but the only numbers that multiply to 9 other than 1 and 9 are 3 and 3, right? -3 and 3 would multiply to -9, but add up to 0. Okay? And the negative here is really important, right? Because 3 plus 3 would give me 6, -3 plus -3 would give me -6. So it has to be a negative here, so that a negative times a positive gives us the negative. So that's the answer. And basically, anytime you only see 2 numbers, it's going to be the same number, a positive and a negative. So let's talk about this one and why it's not going to work. We see x squared plus 10, and there's 2 problems with this, but the first, honestly, I just want to write plus 9. We're going to ignore that it was plus 10. X squared plus 9. And you might think, oh, it's just going to be x plus 3 and x plus 3, right? Because this is positive now and not negative. The problem is no 2 numbers can multiply to 9 and add up to 0, okay? Because if it's positive 9, it has to be 3 and 3 or -3 and a -3, okay? And both of those added up don't add up to 0. So if you ever see something with a plus sign in the middle, that's not an a squared minus b squared form. Okay, that's the real key. Anything that is a minus sign in between them, you can use this special quadratic shortcut that becomes really, really easy. Okay, but this can't be factored. This one definitely can be factored, and if I was doing this on my own, as long as I see it's an x squared minus a number, all you have to do is take the square root of this number, right? The square root of 9 is 3, so to do this, it's going to be the square root of 25, which is positive negative 5, or 5, right? And then this one, you actually could factor with a calculator, because it's just going to be whatever the square root of 27 is. But in this class, I'm only going to give you perfect examples, okay? So you have to be used to seeing stuff like 9, 25, 49. But if you see a number that can't have a square root, like the square root of this is like 5.2 or something, you could do it, but I'm not going to make that a test question or anything. Okay, so I think this was a pretty hard lesson, but we do have 2 more to go over, which are both easy, and we've skipped, and this looks like this, except for it has a leading number, the 4, and the good news is the leading coefficients shouldn't scare you now for the rest of the year, and all you have to do if you want to figure out how to factor this is not just take the square root of this number, but take the square root of this number. So the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 49 is 7. So that first square root is going to be what the 2 leading numbers are, and the second one is going to be what the second numbers are, but one has to be positive and one has to be negative. And very quickly, let's FOIL this to make sure we understand why this works so well. 2x times 2x gives you 4x squared. 7 times 2x gives you 14x. 2x times negative 7 gives you negative 14x. And then 7 times negative 7 gives you negative 49. So the middle cancels out because 14 minus 14 is 0. So we have 4x squared minus 49. Square root of 100 is 10. Square root of 64 is 8. And as long as you understand it, you too can solve them in 5 seconds. Alrighty, really happy that we made it through. I'll definitely make sure everyone knows this is a harder lesson than normal, but we're done with factoring. This is as hard as factoring we'll ever get, and I think that we crushed it. Woo!